Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're taking you to Ashford.
Ashford.
Yeah,
Quaint little town.
yeah, picture perfect. If you can picture a Norman Rockwell painting, that's Ashford, small, quiet, everyone knows your name. But, as we dig a little deeper, we're going to unearth a mystery that really rocked this town back in 2005.
Yeah, and this one's a little different than just a regular missing person case.
Yeah.
This really gets into uh, some of the fault lines underneath that sort of idyllic small town image.
Right.
It really makes you think, like, how well do we really know the people around us?
Yeah, and at the center of this whole story is Sarah Langston. She was 22 years old at the time, a college student, and she really seemed to embody Ashford's promise. She was bright, she was involved, the kind of person everyone was rooting for, psychology. Major active volunteer, dreamed of becoming a social worker.
Someone you'd expect to hear about doing big things,
Yeah.
not vanishing off the face of the earth.
Yeah. Exactly. March 23, 2005, Sarah's finishing up her shift at the diner, just like any other night. She chats with a friend, she heads to her car, and that's where everything just goes dark.
Poof, gone. And her car is found just 2 blocks from her home keys in the ignition. No sign of a struggle.
It's almost like she stepped out for a minute and just vanished into thin air.
Yeah.
Initially, police thought, well, maybe she just took off. Maybe she left on her own accord. But as days turn into weeks, that theory really starts to fall apart.
Yeah.
And the investigation takes a turn. Local volunteers are out there combing through the woods. Detectives are interviewing everyone who knew Sarah.
Yeah, and this is where I think you really start to see those cracks in that community facade start to show.
Yeah.
Rumors start flying. Was somebody following Sarah? Was she involved in something secret? Fear and suspicion just sort of creeps in, and pretty soon you've got neighbors looking at each other sideways.
Right. Yeah. And so one of the first leads that the police get is this anonymous tip that points them to this reclusive farmer named John Henry Green.
John Henry Green.
Yeah. And, nobody really knew Green very well. He was known for being a little eccentric, a little off, but there was no obvious connection to Sarah.
Right, and that's what makes this so interesting, right?
Yeah.
You got these potential suspects popping up,
Yeah.
and they each have their own little secrets, right?
Yeah.
So you got Green, and then you got Mark Bishop, Sarah's ex-boyfriend, who had moved out of town just a few weeks before she disappeared.
Yeah. Their relationship was, a, a little bit rocky, shall we say.
Uh-huh.
So naturally, police start digging into his past. So are these just coincidences, or are these men somehow involved in Sarah's disappearance?
Right, and this is where those investigative techniques really start to come into play.
Yeah.
And then the media gets a hold of it, and it just blows the whole thing up, right?
Yeah.
You've got forensic specialists analyzing her car, combing through her belongings, trying to find any little clue.
Right.
Any clue. And then you get detectives poring over phone records, bank statements, looking for any little inconsistency that can point them in the right direction.
So they're piecing together this puzzle, right? But the pieces just aren't fitting. And meanwhile, the pressure is mounting. Sarah's family's desperate for answers. The community's on edge, and the media's breathing down their necks.
Yeah, and you also see the way that a small town reacts to that kind of pressure.
Right.
Right, everybody's looking for clues everywhere. Suddenly, every weird thing that John Henry Green ever did is super suspicious. Every argument that Sarah ever had with Mark Bishop becomes a huge deal.
Right.
It becomes a breeding ground for speculation and honestly some really harmful gossip.
Yeah, and years pass, the trail runs cold. Sarah's case becomes Ashford's own ghost story.
Right.
Until 2015,
10 years later.
a hunter stumbles across something buried deep in the woods miles from where Sarah vanished. It's a piece of fabric.
And DNA testing confirms it's Sarah's scarf.
Wow.
Yeah, it just blows the case wide open again, right? You've got new forensic tools that they didn't have 10 years ago. The media frenzy starts all over again. The public is interested again.
They're essentially starting from scratch, but with this one piece of evidence, this one clue.
Right, it's like finding a corner piece to a giant puzzle.
Yeah, and that's where the focus starts to shift.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at these, shadowy figures lurking around the edges, they start looking inward at Sarah's inner circle.
Right.
And what they find is a truth more devastating than anyone could have imagined. The person responsible for Sarah's disappearance wasn't some shadowy figure. It was a friend.
A friend. I mean, think about it. We create these pictures in our heads of people based on, how we see them, how they present themselves.
Right.
And this case just rips that all apart.
Yeah.
Sarah thought she could trust someone she let into her life. turns out to be the one who took it away.
It wasn't some random act of violence. This was calculated. This was betrayal by someone who was supposed to be a friend. It's like something out of a, psychological thriller.
It is, and that's where the real depth of this case, I think, lies.
Yeah.
It's the human element. You have to ask yourself, what drives someone to that level of, deception and cruelty? What were the signs maybe that we missed that people overlooked?
It's chilling to think about. So let's dig into that a little bit. Let's talk about the psychology of this friend. Were there red flags in their behavior?
Yeah.
Anything that, looking back, could have tipped people off.
Looking back, yeah, there were definitely things that now seem obvious.
Mm-hmm.
This friend had a pattern of possessiveness and jealousy, especially when Sarah started dating new people.
Right.
They would make little subtle digs, try to isolate her from other friends, downplay her accomplishments.
Almost like they were slowly, chipping away at her confidence, making her more reliant on them.
Exactly. And that's a classic tactic of abusers.
Right.
They isolate their victims. They make them feel like they have no one else to turn to. It's a slow process. It can be really hard to recognize from the outside.
It's terrifying to think about how easily those red flags can be missed, especially in a place like Ashford, where people tend to trust each other implicitly.
Right. You just assume the best in people, and that's the danger of assumptions.
Yeah.
You see someone as a friend, and you automatically assign them all these positive qualities.
Yeah.
Loyalty, kindness, support.
Right.
But sometimes those labels are just a facade,
Yeah.
a mask to hide something much darker underneath.
So what could have been done differently? How can we be more attuned to these signs, both as individuals and as a community?
I think awareness is key. We need to educate ourselves about the tactics that abusers use, the patterns of behavior, to watch out for jealousy, possessiveness, controlling behavior.
Right.
These aren't signs of love. These are red flags.
Right. It's like, if it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. We need to trust our instincts when something feels off.
Absolutely.
Even if it's someone you know and trust.
Yeah. And we need to create a culture where people feel safe speaking up, where they know they'll be taken seriously if they report something.
Yeah. So it's not just about being aware of the signs. It's about fostering an environment where those signs are recognized and acted upon.
Exactly, because silence is often what allows abusers to thrive.
Right.
They rely on the fear of their victims, the reluctance of others to get involved.
Let's go back to the investigation for a second. We talked about those initial suspects, John Henry Green, the farmer, and Mark Bishop, Sarah's ex.
Right.
Knowing what we know now, how did the investigation handle those leads? Did they ever seriously consider that it might be someone Sarah considered a friend?
That's a good question. And it's important to remember that tunnel vision can be a real problem in investigations, especially high-profile ones.
Yeah.
Initially, the focus was so heavily on Green and Bishop that they might have overlooked some of the people closer to Sarah.
So their own assumptions about who was most likely to harm her could have blinded them to the truth.
Exactly. It's a reminder that, investigators, even the most experienced ones, are not immune to bias. They bring their own experiences and perspectives to a case, and that can sometimes cloud their judgment.
It's a good reminder for all of us, really. We create these narratives in our minds about people, and it can be tough to break free from them, even when evidence suggests we should.
It's amazing how powerful our perceptions can be.
And
And it highlights how important it is to stay open to all the possibilities, even the ones that seem, implausible at first.
now let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the impact of this case on Ashford. I mean, this wasn't just a crime. This was a communal trauma. How did the revelation that the killer was someone Sarah trusted affect the community?
I mean, imagine a town where everybody thinks they know each other. Doors are left unlocked, kids play in the streets.
Right.
And then suddenly that sense of security is just shattered.
Gone.
People start questioning everything, wondering who they can trust.
Yeah, like the very foundation of their community was shaken.
Exactly. It created this ripple effect, a wave of paranoia and distrust that spread through the town. Neighbors started looking at each other differently, wondering if they really knew the people they were living next to.
Did this lead to any significant changes within the community? Did they do anything to address the underlying issues that may have, contributed to this?
It definitely sparked a lot of difficult conversations.
Yeah.
There was a push for more awareness about domestic violence and abuse, more resources for victims, a greater emphasis on teaching young people about healthy relationships.
So out of this tragedy came this renewed focus on prevention and support.
It's a bittersweet outcome.
It is.
but it's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah.
Even in the face of just unimaginable darkness, there's always that flicker of hope, a desire to learn and grow from the experience.
Let's talk about Sarah's family. How did they cope with this unimaginable loss, knowing that someone they welcomed into their home was responsible for taking their daughter's life?
There are no words to adequately describe the pain that they endured. It's one thing to lose a child to an accident or illness, but to have their life taken so cruelly by someone they trusted, it's a wound that runs deep.
Did they ever find any solace or closure, any sense of justice in the aftermath?
While nothing can truly heal the pain of losing Sarah, the arrest and conviction of her friend did bring a sense of accountability. It allowed them to finally begin the process of grieving and honoring her memory without the added burden of uncertainty.
I imagine that the revelation of the perpetrator's identity only amplified their grief and sense of betrayal.
Absolutely. It added another layer of complexity and anguish to their loss. The realization that someone they had shared meals with, someone who had laughed with their daughter, was capable of such darkness. It's a truly devastating betrayal.
So we've explored the investigation, the psychology of the perpetrator, the impact on the community, and the profound grief of Sarah's family. What's the takeaway from all of this? What lessons can we as listeners glean from this heart-wrenching story?
This case shines a harsh light on the fact that darkness can lurk in the most unexpected places, even within the seemingly safe confines of our homes and communities. It reminds us that we can't always rely on appearances or assumptions to guide our judgments.
It's like a wake-up call to be more vigilant, more attuned to the subtle signs of danger, and more willing to speak up when something feels amiss.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that even those we trust most are capable of deceit and cruelty, and it's about having the courage to challenge our own perceptions and to advocate for those who may be vulnerable or at risk.
This has been a heavy but important conversation. We've delved into the complexities of this case, exploring the psychological, social, and investigative aspects that make it so compelling. Now let's shift our focus to the broader implications of this story. We've talked about, the red flags and the perpetrator's behavior, but let's zoom out a bit. What does this case say about our tendency as humans to trust appearances, especially within our own communities?
I think this case is a stark reminder that evil doesn't always wear a menacing mask. It can hide behind a friendly smile, acts of kindness, even years of seemingly genuine friendship. And that dissonance is what makes this story so unsettling.
It challenges our assumptions about who's capable of harm.
Right.
We like to think we can spot the bad guys, but this case really throws that idea out the window.
It forces us to acknowledge that darkness can exist anywhere, even in the hearts of those we believe we know best. And that's a truth that applies not just to small towns like Ashford, but to any community, any relationship.
So how do we reconcile that? How do we balance, a healthy sense of trust with this awareness that even those closest to us can be capable of such darkness?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I don't think it's about living in a state of constant suspicion or distrust. It's about informed vigilance.
Okay.
It's about educating ourselves about the patterns of abusive behavior, the red flags to watch out for.
So knowledge is power in this case.
Absolutely. The more we understand the dynamics of manipulation and abuse, the better equipped we are to recognize them, even in those subtle forms. And crucially, I think we need to foster a culture where people feel empowered to speak up,
Right.
to report concerns without fear of judgment or retaliation.
Because if there's one thing we've learned from Sarah's story, it's that silence can be deadly.
It's often the fear of speaking out, that allows abusers to maintain control. And by breaking that silence, by encouraging open communication and support for victims, we can create a safer environment for everyone.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on a point we made earlier about investigative tunnel vision.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the initial focus on John Henry Green and Mark Bishop might have actually delayed the discovery of the truth. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. When investigators develop a theory early on, it can be hard to shift their focus, even when new evidence emerges. And in this case, the early suspicions surrounding Green and Bishop, fueled by those rumors and their perceived outsider status, likely created a bias that may have prevented them from considering other possibilities.
So in a way, the community's own assumptions and prejudices might have inadvertently hindered the investigation.
That's a possibility worth considering. It really highlights the importance of objectivity in investigations, the need to constantly question assumptions and be willing to, reevaluate theories as new information comes to light.
It's a reminder that even those tasked with seeking justice are humans susceptible to the same biases and cognitive shortcuts as everyone else.
Exactly. And it underscores the need for constant vigilance, self-reflection, and a willingness to challenge our own perspectives, to ensure that justice is served.
Well, this deep dive into Sarah Langston's disappearance has been a journey through darkness, a stark reminder that even in seemingly idyllic settings, evil can lurk. But it's also been a journey of discovery, revealing the complexities of human nature, the power of perception, and the importance of vigilance both in our personal lives and within our communities.
And while Sarah's story is a tragedy, it also offers a powerful lesson in resilience. It reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable loss and betrayal, there is always hope, a chance to learn to grow and to create a safer and more compassionate world.
And for our listeners out there, we leave you with this final thought. Be observant, be aware, and be willing to speak up when something feels wrong. You might just be the voice that prevents another tragedy, like Sarah's. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive